Charley Johnson has spent over 20 years in corporate as a business owner, 7 years in nonprofit as the president of the Pay It Forward Foundation, and 10 years with an enlightened teacher. The combination of these three things creates a unique set of skills that will be crucial for companies and their employees moving forward. Today, he's on a mission to bring the position of Chief Consciousness Officer to the forefront of the business world and into all companies. In his words, consciousness is not spiritual, it is tactical and belongs in business and the day-to-day lives of 8 billion people. Charley is the author of the book, Truth Has No Sides. Here's his introduction. If you think you're right, then so is the other side. If you think the other side is wrong, then so are you. Until we see that both sides are creating the division and conflict we all don't want, nothing will change. So if you're ready for change in the business world and beyond, join us for a revolutionary conversation around the New Earth workplaces. Do you ever feel like you're living in an episode of Black Mirror? Like no one truly thinks about the future as long as they can make the most of today. The past, long forgotten, even though it was given to us so we can learn from it. Aren't you tired of sounding like a broken record? Of chasing dreams that are getting you nowhere in life? You want to create positive change on Earth, but you seem to be the only one who cares. Shush now, dreamer. Calm your worries. The New Earth messengers have arrived. We've been here for a while now, actually, patiently waiting for our activation time. And this is it. New Earth On is a podcast about exploring how we can channel higher consciousness into the everyday experiences of Earth so that we can transform our world for the better and, save the planet. Together, we'll reimagine Earth in a way that allows us to stay connected to our consciousness across every aspect of life: family, work, society, even our own identity. Your higher self is calling you back home. I hear there's another golden age for us on the other side. If you're ready to embark on a lifelong adventure filled with purpose and joy, let's map out the New Earth together. The future of workplaces might look like nothing that we have ever seen on movies as well. I'm talking about way into the future where people have activated their connection to their consciousness, they've activated dormant spiritual gifts, and they can almost connect to one another without even using words. Telepathically, they can send each other messages like that. They can ground big pieces of information from their higher selves. How do we get there? You, as the Chief Consciousness Officer, are proposing a brand new role into the workplaces to orchestrate this shift. How long do you think it will take us, and how much can we expect people to transition, realistically speaking?
A chief consciousness officer is kind of like in the book Siddhartha, where there is one side of the river and there's an individual who rows you to the other side, right? It's a choice that individuals are going to start making, but that choice is going to be started to be made by a shift in consciousness, right? So when that shift happens, which is happening right now, you and I know that this is a shift that humanity's never experienced. The chief consciousness officer is going to be the boat guide, right? They're in a sense, they're going to help people understand what's happening, that it's okay to cross to the other side. When that happens, which I believe it's happening right now, it's going to become kind of like our cell phones, our iPhones. You and I are used to it now. It's just, it naturally was let out over the last 15, 20 years. If you were to give an iPhone to someone back in the 70s or 80s, they would have lost their minds, right? So consciousness in the universe has a great way of subtly shifting people naturally, like a 22-year-old turning 23, and it just brings it up. Not much changes from 22 to 23, but we're 23. We're 365 days older. When this happens, I don't know exactly when people will start having more telepathic options like you talk about, because I know some people have that now. when they're able to tap into their higher self more naturally, when they have the clarity of consciousness to expand their awareness to tap in to more of the consciousness, knowledge structured in consciousness, because when we know better, we do better in a sense. It's just going to take time, but organizations, instead of being resistant to it, thinking that this shift is like other shifts in the past, they're going to need and they're going to want a chief consciousness officer, someone like you, someone like me, someone like the others who understand this on staff to just be there to guide, to help customer service agents or mid-level managers or VPs or executives. Their different thoughts are going to come up, right? Everything they've suppressed their entire existence is going to come up. They've been confident for decades. They've been clear on their path. They've been understanding of how business works and the dynamics between a boss and an employee. The veil has thinned so much that the, lack of better words, their bullshit meter is off the charts. So an executive will look at them with a smile on their face and say, we really appreciate you, what you've done for us. The employee will know that what they said is not what they meant. That causes incredible amounts of division, which we're seeing right now. So executives are doing the same thing they've always done. They may have changed it a little, but not in the way you and I are talking. And they're wondering why the gap is widening. They're wondering why their employees are more upset than usual. They're wondering why HR is having such an issue in hiring the people they need to hire. Because that's another thing. HR is always going to go after the same 5 steps and the same individuals that got them to this place. Well, this place is falling apart. A chief consciousness officer is going to help HR start to hire more clear individuals, higher level of consciousness individuals, people who will collaborate more, people who will be more dynamic in how they interact from day to day with each other. Because a lot of people spend more time with the people they work with than their families. But we always spend a lot of time figuring out our families and our spouse and our kids and everything else. But at work, it's just kind of like the side project, and HR implements a wellness program that no one cares about. The CEO signs off on the budget begrudgingly because they don't think it's worth it. And then they wonder why there's this unique energy and unique culture that's kind of fallen apart. So this discussion is being discussed more. I'm seeing more and more people talk about consciousness in the right way, not in a right or wrong way, but in the way that is going to merge those worlds. Because there's quite a few people that want to destroy companies and capitalism and money and everything else, but they don't have an alternative. It's like a Catholic becoming an atheist, a Republican becoming a Democrat. It's heads the tails of the coin. We need to just subtly, as we age, as we raise in consciousness, as the universe knows that we need to subtly shift, we need to do the same thing in business. And the next logical step, as well as you know, is consciousness. It's always been there, but we need to make people aware of it.
A lot of people are walking around like empty vessels, even though they are still connected, but they have a little bit of a firewall around them, all the programming, all the limiting beliefs, everything that they've been told they should hold on to so that they can fit in, so that they can be of service, even though their consciousness, their soul already has that programming. They just need to download it. They just need to implement it, integrate it, and then channel it. One idea that comes to mind is that we've already done this. I think this is where some of the conflict is happening, is that we've seen those that have expressed interest in history and culture, the type of consciousness rise that we're going towards right now, all the way back in Lemuria, Atlantis, ancient Egypt, where there have been open channeling, I suppose, open expression of the consciousness in different words, I suppose, different systems. But we have seen what we're trying to do right now to make Earth a more connected space to the spiritual realm in a way that allows us to advance humanity. I think what we haven't seen is connecting the work with the consciousness, connecting the work with the spirituality. So entrepreneurship becoming a spiritual function and not just, oh, we're going to separate from the soul and we're going to be entrepreneurs so we can advance. We've seen that split also between science and spirituality. Science does not believe in spirituality, and therefore it's progressing its research in complete separation, even though the two domains are talking about the exact same thing. So maybe those that are kind of against capitalism, they're thinking, oh, we can bring back Atlantis, we can bring back these golden ages from the past. But in reality, we can't, because they had its function when it happened. And we've already collected that data. The consciousness has already experienced that data. So now it's time to think about what have we learned from being high performers and high achievers, because we've created some really amazing blueprints at the level of the conscious mind to process the data, to work and create structures. But there is I can almost anticipate that the ego is going to put up a fight, and there's a lot of ego in the current business world. um, how does one approach even addressing their own ego, if especially when you have people in high positions of power, intelligent people of high position of power, that they don't think that they have any work to do, inner work to do? They're in denial.
Carefully.
Yeah.
Carefully, and very, very subtly, and in a set of words and dialogue and narrative that makes them feel comfortable in that shift. One of the greatest teachers, Ramana Maharishi, one of the greatest sages, most enlightened sages, he would talk to people differently depending on where they were internally when they crossed his path. So if an atheist crossed his path, he would talk to them about that. If a Catholic crossed his path, he would talk about creation. If a Buddhist talked his path, he would talk to them about nothingness and the self. If someone was very advanced on the spiritual path, he wouldn't talk to him. He would just tell him to sit next to him and sit in silence. So thinking that there's a lot of conscious capitalism, there's a lot of people in the consciousness world, a lot of people on the spiritual path that come into business with just as much ego as the business owner has or the CEO has, thinking that they are right and the CEO's wrong. Approach the owners, the executives, make them feel that it's all one, all love, and that we need to make a massive shift. We've tried that. It doesn't work. We've spent the last 20 years in spiritual escapism and wellness programs. The question to you and every person that I've been talking to lately is, how's it working? Truly, like all of these wellness programs, for the last 2 decades, we've done nothing but talk about meditation, yoga, the spiritual path, mindfulness, and how these larger organizations like Google and Facebook and all these big time players have sleep pods, and they bring in yoga instructors, and they bring in mindfulness, and they've got wellness programs. Medium and large companies and small companies have jumped on board with that as well. The world's never been so chaotic. The world's never been so divided. So how is it working? Because the last 20 years, the reason we did what we did was, I think a lot of people's hearts were in the right place, but it was an inauthentic from the people who implemented them. The people who wanted to bring mindfulness to the organizations, who thought it would be good to de-stress people in a company, were right, but they were so far off on the right that they had left the business world behind. They've left corporate America behind. They left money behind. They went off and had a great teacher and had some great meditation experiences and became a yoga instructor, and thought that the way of changing business was to change business. And business was very resistant to it. Again, HR did it in a way that was inauthentic. They did it because they thought it was going to help the employees be more profitable and work more. It wasn't for the health of the employees in a sense. CEOs signed off on the budget for a wellness program begrudgingly because they didn't believe in it. The difference now, you know as well as I do, with Neptune slipping into Aries, we've gone from the spiritual escapism to a true co-creation.
Mm-hmm.
True co-creation. This is where you don't manifest, you don't do the affirmations, you don't do all the stuff that we've seen in the last 20 years. This is putting your energy and your efforts, your mind, and creating a reality that you want. The whole manifesting world in the past 20 years has been a pretty unique thing to watch. You know, someone teaches manifestation and they have one person, or they've done some great stuff with manifestation, and they have a couple people that do their class and it works, but then they've got 100 that do the class and it doesn't work. They only focus on those few that worked. They don't talk about the 99 or 100 that it didn't work, right? We're always putting testimonials on our spiritual websites of the few individuals that it worked for. So when you and I are talking about bringing consciousness into a company, conscious to me is not spiritual. It is tactical. It is business from the beginning. It's always been there. They have had access to, but they didn't know it because all they've thought about is the mind, the middleman, right? These companies have been given a blank check of consciousness and they cashed it for $100. They've drastically undersold their opportunities, their resources, their abilities, and how their employees can function in the workplace because they never thought about consciousness. It's like the two fish swimming in water. When someone brings water to their attention, they ask themselves, what's water? They've never known what water is. Well, you know as well as I do, and I'm glad these discussions are getting out there. That's consciousness. You and I, your listeners, every person that's aware or unaware, we are all swimming in consciousness. And it's a vast, infinite resource that very few people tap into. So once we bring that discussion into organizations and make them aware of it, they can't unhear it. They start to change how they go about their business. They start to change how they go about division and conflict. They go about their wellness programs. So just discussions like this, it's people like you who are bringing that to the awareness of individuals. It's perfect.
I love it. Everything that you're saying, it almost feels like there is no escaping it. There's no bypassing it. It's just the natural next step. We're each awakening, we're each ascending. I think some people are still going to try to close their eyes or ears to what's happening. I've definitely experienced it myself as I was awakening, and I tried to infuse more of the everyday communication with people with all the ideas that were coming naturally through me. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I want to engage in that type of conversation. So I've had to tone down my ideas around certain people or completely remove myself, which eventually I did because I realized this is happening for me and I can suppress my growth or I can allow it to happen and take me where I need to go. And in a way, allow myself to flow. Now, for anyone that's listening or watching and they're thinking, well, how and in what way am I going to connect to my higher self, my consciousness, my soul? What does that look like? What does that feel like? I would say that once you get to that point where you're channeling yourself, and I mean your highest expression of self, it just feels like having a conversation with yourself. And it feels like you're being given the steps as to what you're here to do. And in that way, you can channel your own book, you can channel a series of conversations, even the conversation that we're having right now. This arrived as an idea that was guided from above, as I like to say, from my higher self, from my spirit team. This isn't something that I thought I'm going to be doing one day, but once it arrived, once I saw it, once I conceived it, I was like, yep, this makes sense. This is part of the plan. I need to do this. And then you're almost given step after step after step after step. And my personal belief is that every single person on earth has their own purpose, their unique purpose, their unique research that they need to complete with their consciousness to bring it back to the consciousness level that also keeps them part of a collective. So you and I, we might be part of the same collective that's advancing the conversation around bringing consciousness into the workplace. Then you might have your own separate mission or soul purpose that's attached to your consciousness, the same way that I have. And my unique soul purpose is guiding me to write 10 books. Your soul purpose is guiding you to deliver 10 workshops. So we're each expressing that unique soul purpose in our own ways, but we're also part of a collective mission that keeps us connected, which removes a little bit that attachment to a single employment contract, a single attachment to a career path. We're becoming a little bit more fluid. Do you think that's going to affect the workplaces in a way where we're seeing more freelancers, I suppose, or we're seeing more open contracts that are up to change versus these fixed term contracts for 5 years where you have to negotiate and everything takes forever and it's so even thinking about it, even talking about it, it just feels a little bit old school. Now that I've experienced what it's like co-creating with my soul, with my consciousness, going back to the old style restrictions just feels like taking a step back, even though it's, part of the structures, I suppose.
I think it's different for each individual because there are, such as what you just said, thinking of going back into like full-time employment for an organization with the knowledge you have feels old school. It feels resistant, restricted, and it doesn't feel right. Right?
For
Okay.
my journey at the moment, yes. Yeah.
For me, when we have these discussions, it's not this blanket, this is what you should do, like it's been the last 20 years when people speak. This is just what you think and what I think. This is my direct experience, just like yours. I actually, after 10 years with my teacher and trying to rid myself of the business aspect, of the passion I have, of the aggression I have, it didn't go away. And it reminds me of Ram Dass when he said, after 20 his teacher, how powerful he was. After all of the psilocybin, all of the psychedelics, all of the meditation, he said not a single one of these went away. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay. So I'm sitting here trying to be like my teacher, being cool, calm, and collect, and a little bit more monotone and soft, and trying to be, backing off, and it's all one. And I tried to be like him. It brought a lot of depression onto me because that's not who I am. We have an individual understanding of who we're supposed to be, and with this clarity brings about a more of a focus and a clear view of who we're supposed to be. And that doesn't mean we're human. We're always seeing the constructs where if we jump on the spiritual path, we see what we want to see, which we think is peace and bliss and enlightenment. It's going to change everything, and we're going to remove everything we don't like, and it's going to fill back in with everything good. That's not the case as well. You know as well as I do. So when you say that feels restricted, for me, I want to go back into business. I want to go back into a 100-employee company or a 1,000-employee company or a big company and be around all of those individuals and just show people what a chief consciousness officer can do, what a clear, powerful consciousness can do by just being in the room, right? Because there's a significant amount of people that when they really raise their consciousness and their clarity, they become incredibly sensitive to this dense 3D world, and they can't be around a lot of people. My fiance is one of them.
Me too.
They're very empathic. They're very sensitive, right? And they retreat, but not in a negative way. They just cannot handle being around a big group. Well, my path, after everything I went through, everything I learned, the people that can levitate, the people that can read you, the people that can tell you everything you're thinking, being around those individuals and still having the business background, the nonprofit background, the time with my teacher, and not being sensitive. I am sensitive in a way, but I can still be around a big group of people. I can still be around a CEO or a customer service person or a dog walker. I love being around. My purpose seems to be going back in like a Trojan horse in a sense, and being around those individuals and talking to them on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis, knowing their fears, their insecurities, and bringing to them what you and I are discussing in a very business-oriented way, not a spiritual way, because the vast majority of this planet is not spiritual. They're religious, or they're dogmatic, or they have their own beliefs. Well, when you have someone that is as neutral as this wall behind me is, just as wide as can be, and does not have a dog in the fight, imagine an organization having that on staff. A world that's never been more divided and conflicted. We need neutrality. Politics continuously talks about working with the other side of the aisle. Really, it doesn't seem like it's working too well. Businesses have really cool quotes on the wall, and their HR has put in something in the booklet of what their values are. Very few people live that. Look at the world, look at the business, look at how divided are, look how conflicted we are. So we can, consultants and everybody and coaches can talk about how we need to implement this, and CEOs and executives can talk till they're blue in the face of what their values are, what their core principles are, how much they care about their employees. It's not working. It's not working because the world is shifting in a way we've never seen before, and we need guidance. We need that person who will take us from this side of the river to the next side of the river, because that person's just rowing a boat. Nothing intelligent about it, nothing special about it. They're just there to make people go to the other side on their own accord. So a chief consciousness officer would most likely report to the CEO, but not have authority over any group in the company. They would be the glue. They would be the warmer. And the reason I use that word is there's a movie called The Cooler. with William H. Nacy. And he's called the cooler because a casino hires him when someone's playing blackjack and doing really well, or someone's at a roulette table and doing really well. They bring him in to grab a drink and go sit on that table. His energy cools the table. It cools the roulette table, and they crap out or they stop winning cards. So a chief consciousness officer, I bring that example up to show chief consciousness officer would be the polar opposite. They would walk into a room, into a C-suite, into a bunch of meetings, and they would raise the consciousness of everyone in the room so there was less division, less conflict, and less walls. There was more authenticity, even if at a subtle level. That person would be around the watering hole talking to customer service and middle-level managers and VPs and just helping people understand their biases, their conditioning. And when someone at that neutral level asks a question, they will start to understand it's just out of pure curiosity. It's not to judge. It's not to fire them. It's not to have something on them. And when they finally get to feel that neutrality, it's amazing what they will share. They will talk about consciousness. They will talk about voices they hear. They will talk about seeing angels or different dimensions. And when you get that out of them, which they probably never shared with their family or their spouse or any of their friends, you start to realize how many people have had that experience. And maybe Susie, who had that experience, who doesn't like Ed because he's a Republican and she's a Democrat, you can say, Ed had that same experience. And we can start to take the fear and the magic, in a sense, out of the unknown. We can make it known because everything's consciousness. And once people better understand what consciousness is, it doesn't matter if they're in second grade going into third, it will make them more open. And that's all we need. We just need a little subtle more openness for less division and conflict.
So essentially, when I said earlier to you that people are walking around like empty vessels, maybe that's not the right way to say it. They're walking around like clogged vessels, like blocked vessels. So they need to be opened so that they can release that which is not serving them, that which has already kind of delayed their operational system. If we think about the consciousness as a computer system, as software, they need to continuously install the new updates. And these updates are being guided from the consciousness. They're not guided from a Bill Gates or Zuckerberg or anyone else in the physical space here. One thing that comes to mind, because I've been that consciousness officer that you're talking about. I've been into places where I've preserved my consciousness at a high level, but the effect wasn't always that of uplifting. It was sometimes a mirror to people's shadow self. It was a mirror to people's limiting beliefs. It was a mirror to people's insecurities. And so my personal experience is that I've triggered a lot of people. And I know that in doing so, I have liberated them to explore different ways of being, different ways of doing things, and even looking at themselves differently. But anyone that's kind of considering this path of being a chief consciousness officer and representing the domain of the consciousness in the workplace, I think they should be also mindful that some people might act out in a very fast-paced, direct their projections. So sometimes bringing someone with a higher consciousness into the workplace might create a little bit of a pushback that creates chaos as people are trying to normalize the middle ground, because you have this person that's really high here and then you have a group of people that are here, and then you're showing them glimpses, hey, you can be here. So they have these almost like glitches when they're like, oh yeah, I can be there, but then they realize they're here, so now they're projecting, how could you show me that I can be here and leave me back here, without realizing that they're the ones that they need to take the steps to ascend. What would you advise people around this part of the process, I suppose, is the question.
I think the individual has to have a great consciousness. Kind of like you said, you're up here, they're down here. We both know that with the intelligence of the universe, they're not going to go from second grade into junior high. If you take a third grader and put them into high school and say you need to go find a boyfriend or girlfriend and you're now driving, like their minds would implode, right? The universe is smart enough to know that. So it's going to be subtle. So I think a chief consciousness officer is really going to be really good with their really good with their awareness, really good in reading the room, really good in understanding very quickly where the consciousness is of those individuals and helping them go from uh, uh, reading the room in a sense where you and I could talk about this stuff. We could talk about really high levels of consciousness and clarity. We could talk about the shifts happening on this planet. But like Ramana, understanding that if someone comes in and you can just feel where they're at, you can see the books they read, you can see how they interact with stuff, you just talk to them differently. But I'm assuming what you said is going to be true with some of the chief consciousness officers in the future, but that's no different than when technology took over the business world and companies had to start hiring CTOs, chief technology officers. There was some good ones, and then there were some ones that said they were good, ass handed to them, right? So there are going to be good and not so good chief. Agree, because I've experienced that. When you do walk into a room, you could be a mirror for their shadow self. You could be a mirror for the stuff they've suppressed. You could bring something up in them that they don't want to deal with just yet. So I assume that's going to happen as well. I have, luckily or unluckily, I don't know exactly, that doesn't happen too much with me. I think that's because of my business background, my nonprofit background, and the thing that the universe put in me, which, like, if I ever ask the question to anyone, would you think I'm spiritual? Like the way I'm built, the way I talk, the passion, the aggression, the way I swear, most people, 99%, when I ask that question, they'd say no. No. So when we talk about unique paths, I guess I've been given the ability to not come across spiritual. So it doesn't, the walls for individuals usually aren't up thinking this guy's coming in to impact me in a wellness program. He's going to force me to meditate. He's not Catholic, so I'm going to hurry and put the walls up and resist him. My has worked out well for me because when I walk into a room, it creates naturally of no doing of my own. I don't have that intelligence. I don't have that ability. It just naturally opens up the room, and all of a sudden people start sharing. All of a sudden companies that took 5 years to figure things out and talk about gets done in a month. Being with my soccer team, seeing guys that have known each other for a couple of years playing soccer on the same team, and they don't know what each other does for work. And then all of a sudden someone comes in and starts asking different questions, the consciousness shifts, and now they're going to have lunch because they realize they basically worked in the same company and they didn't know it for 2 years. So I think there's going to be chief consciousness officers that threaten an organization and threaten the employees in it just because of just their natural abilities and how powerful they are. And then I think there's going to be are going to create an open space, right? So just again, like the chief technology officers or chief marketing officers or CEOs, there's going to be good ones, and and what I would like to do, and I think you probably do the same, is as these companies do finally start to hire chief consciousness officers, I would like to help organizations find that individual, because there's a considerable amount. The more you and I have talked about this, the more I've done these interviews, I've had quite a few people say, that's right in line with something I would like to do. What does that mean? And what I usually say is the first thing I will tell them is I don't talk about what it is. I talk about what it's not. Because they hear they hear the word consciousness, and they immediately go to wellness, meditation, mindfulness. I want to go put this into a company full time. Again, the wellness programs haven't done that well. So what I tell them is what a chief consciousness, I think, is not. It needs to be strategic. It needs to be tactical. It needs to be something that the vast majority of the business world can resonate with, can understand. How can it make them more profitable? How can it better their employees? So I think it's no cut and dry answer like anything else, just reading the room. And I would assume the company that hires a chief consciousness officer is going to understand the pros and the cons and how their people are, and we'll just go from there. We'll just take it day by day.
It has to be customizable, and I think this is the process for everything going forward. Customizable curriculum at school, customizable growth plans, in the workplace, and then even customizable evolutionary community plans when it comes to your family. A lot of families, they think, oh, here's the child, we're raising that child, the child has a roof over their head, they have food on the table, that's it. We've done our parenting job. And there's so much more that's required to create healthy humans, thriving humans. And so the workplace is one of those places, those aspects of our life where we spend a great amount of time. So we need to invest more time and more energy in creating those spaces to be optimized for the future, in a way where we're advancing humanity through our being on earth, through our consciously choosing to connect with our own consciousness. Because as we're talking about this, I keep going back to my own memories of this journey. And I know it happened a few years ago. I've not been into the office space full time since then, but it was just like being in school and having those cliques of insecure and immature people, and they're just laughing about, they're waiting for the day to be over. That's not going to go away for a while. People are still going to perceive the workplace as just something that they have to do, because they won't even know that their life has purpose to the extent that they can make such a huge difference for the future generations as well through their choices and decisions today. So there's a whole process around re-educating humans as to what it means to be human, and actually how much more there is to life than what they're currently going through.
Yes, and I think the thing that came to my mind as you spoke about that is, I think a chief consciousness officer, one that understands how this works, knows it's not going to change overnight, and there is still going to be bad employees. So the expectations for an organization that's going to hire a chief consciousness officer need to be set and understood right up front. There are going to be employees that, yeah, like you said, are counting the clock down until 4:59. What I think needs to is the levels that you're talking about, is making sure that most likely you are just going to take someone from 5th to 6th grade. Just a subtle shift. But we both know that that subtle shift on a universal level is massive across a 500 employee organization. If every single one of those 500 employees raises up just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
you can't measure that. And the amount of time saved, the amount of conflict and division removed, the amount of more profit, the amount of less instances where HR has to get involved, people who are upset at work, maybe a day ago they would have kicked the dog, maybe they go home now and they don't kick the dog. Truly just subtle shifts. Maybe someone cuts them off in traffic, and instead of honking their horn and flipping them off, they get a little angry, but they don't honk their horn and flip them off. Really subtle shifts, helping the organization know truly the awareness of Susie and Eddie don't get along because of this. That knowledge that you and I are discussing gets planted in the brain. That is a little seed, and the universe is the best water, best gardener in the world. They may not understand what you've told them. They may not agree with it, but it's a seed that's planted and it grows. And what it does is it naturally takes this awareness and slowly starts to expand it. So instead of guessing what's outside of this awareness, they get to actually see what's out there. And when they see that, you can't talk about it in a scientific way, but when they start to expand their awareness, it's 100% of the time there's a shift. You can't unhear it. You can't unsee it. You can't unknow what's just been told. And a chief consciousness officer is going to bring in different knowledge, a different view, different questions, different perspectives. And hopefully they're a very neutral vessel that allows people to be open to opening up more.
I think one of the implications of raising the consciousness in the workplace also is that the energy levels are going to be optimized to the point where your recovery time also is a lot shorter. So you're not spending as much time in angry states, in sad states, and dissociation, depression, because you're suppressing all of these emotions. You're allowing them to flow with more ease. And so you're not fluctuating between these drastic states where you have to fake it, we have to wear the mask. Sure, some days you're not feeling up to the task, but that's okay, because that's just one day instead of like a whole week or a whole month where you've been faking how you're really feeling. And it's much easier to communicate what your soul actually wants to communicate, or your inner child, depending on what aspect of you wants to come through. Sometimes it's more intuitive, sometimes it's more logical. I think when they
hear the word spirituality, they think right away, oh, these people don't have the intelligence, because they think these are people that are just, flowing in life and using all of their intuition. But the purpose of spirituality, when it enters your life, is for you to activate more of that dormant intuition so that you're more balanced. The logic and the intuition side by side, which then allows you to ascend. This has been a very beautiful discussion, very eye opening. I think I'm feeling just a little bit of sadness as we're talking, that regardless of the amount of work that we have done and that we're doing and that we'll be doing, we still have adults that are stuck literally or figuratively in the fifth grade, and we have to slowly move them. And it makes me sad that this is how much the consciousness has been corrupted over the generations, that we are now teaching adults what it means to be human, to the extent that we are, because we're literally trying to hold so much space for them to relearn how to human. It's beautiful to see it, but there's just a little bit of that sadness, that how did we end up here? Like, what happened? When did that communication with our higher selves, with the consciousness, get broken and corrupted to the point where you have literally adults, millions of them, disabled from their own connection to their higher self? I think that in itself should be studied and analyzed in a way that it's more practical, and in a way that guides us how to shift all of the industries in a way where we never get to this place. But there is hope regardless. And I think what you mentioned around the values piece is important, that you cannot unite people in a company around a set of values if each of those individual human beings doesn't have their own set of values, if they haven't had the time, the space, the energy invested to figure out who they are and what their values are. Because it's sometimes you might discover that the company's values, while they're great, they're out of alignment with your own values. So the company might be doing something amazing, but you're on a completely different mission that requires completely different set of values. And so that self-awareness piece is always going to be crucial when it comes to being of service in a workplace, in that shared community. How are you feeling after this discussion? Do you feel hope? Do you feel mixed feelings a little bit, or is it all positive attitude towards the future?
I feel great hope having these discussions, because I understand how consciousness works. And this is a collective thing. And the very fact that you allowed this conversation to happen raises everyone up. And the only one thing that I would like to add to this as we come to a close is there are a significant amount of people who are feeling things they've never felt, thinking thoughts they've never thought, losing their insecurities are coming up, stuff they've suppressed for decades, didn't even know existed, are coming up. If you've never experienced it, never felt it, and don't know how to deal with it, it creates an ungodly amount of fear. And a chief consciousness officer would come into an organization because of their neutrality. You would hear this from probably every level of employee. And when that new position is there to help them understand why that's happening, there is such a sense of relief in that individual you can't even fathom. I talked to 3 people yesterday, 2 of them buddies of my soccer buddies. One of them was their wife. All 3 of them that I talked to on the phone, you could hear them verbally and physically crying. It was bringing up so emotion. Mm-hmm. My answer to them was what you and I were discussing. The shift in planets, the shift in consciousness. It's okay. Nothing's wrong. Your job's not wrong. Your spouse isn't wrong. Your kids aren't wrong. You've done nothing wrong. There's nothing out of place. It's just this natural consciousness that's bringing up things. Release them. All 3 of those individuals were ecstatic at the end of the call. They were so relieved, and they all sent texts, and they all sent emails, and they all sent me, they followed up with calls just to say how much better they felt because someone finally gave them an understanding of what's going on. Because all 3 of them had therapists, and those therapists couldn't help them. So when you and I talk about things are going to be different, consultants are going to be different, bosses are going to be different, therapy is going to be different, self-development is going to be different, because everyone's shifting. Their DNA, their cells, their consciousness is shifting. This is where I think the most powerful thing a chief consciousness officer can do is understand what you're talking about. but help these individuals know that nothing's wrong, nothing's out of place. They don't need to make a drastic life shift. It's not a midlife crisis. Their job and it's the natural shifting of consciousness that's bringing everything up at once and overwhelming them. And just this 2 minutes of you and I discussing is probably the most powerful part of this discussion that your listeners can listen to, because they're going to hear that and say, oh, this is not my bad karma. This is not because I did this. This is not because my job's out of place. This is not because my boss said this. This is not because my spouse and I are, is all of the stuff I've never wanted to deal with. And instead of putting 100 pounds on the bench press, the universe has put 300, and it's going to pass. And individuals at any level of consciousness hear that, there's such a sense of relief, because you and I both know that's correct. We know that's correct. That's what's happening to you and to me. It's overwhelming to me. I don't care how much teaching you have or how much experience or knowledge you have, this much coming to you at once, and there's this big of a shift, it overwhelms everybody. But that, when you brought up that last discussion, that having that discussion with people within the organization and helping them even at the CEO level, because those are really intelligent, confident people. If they start doubting themselves, if they start having thoughts, if they start worrying about stuff, that messes with them more than people who have never had that confidence. So having someone tell them why this is happening, that right there is worth a CCO's salary, bar none.
And equally, when you have these people in high positions of power and intelligence, when they finally open their hearts and let the love purify every aspect of their life, the impact that they're going to make on earth, I don't think they've experienced it. The type of connection that you have with people, with partners, with clients, even your own family. Like, you're no longer seeking the validation based on status, on the money. You're no longer seeking any career path just so that you can be seen for the ego, but rather because this is your truest, fullest, most authentic expression. This is what you would do even if no one paid you for. And finally, you get to be of service. You get to bring that joy to other people because you're emanating that joy every single day. There's no more resistance. You're not going against yourself. So there is hope. I think having spoken about, the turbulence that workplaces are experiencing, there is hope. There's always hope.
Yes. There
was
absolutely. I agree.
A thought that came through, and it's passed. So I guess it wasn't important to the conversation. But
if it comes up, let me know.
I think you made a really good point about therapists, which is relevant to any industry or any profession, that if your job requires you to create a codependency with your clients or with your partners, and your well-being, financial well-being depends on that codependency, you're not really trying to help people, everyone that you meet. You're trying to get them hooked so that you're safe. And this is why we've seen this codependency have that ripple effect of, you can look into the celebrity model. You have these famous people that are relying on the people, they're relying on the masses. It's a domino effect, but they're bringing you down in order for you to be part of that domino. So imagine if everyone's separated, if everyone was their own authentic self and also light, how we can light up the world with this. And it's a lightness. It's a lightness of being, just being, not being dependent on something or someone to feel happy, to feel successful, but rather feeling the interconnectedness that you and I are always connected, even if we just met, and the joy that comes from that understanding that we're always interconnected, each on our separate journeys and missions, but each being able to share something with each other to make our life a little bit easier, a little bit more meaningful. Yes. I think it's a beautiful transformation. And those that, there it is, I remember now. Okay, you mentioned the bad karma, and I think this is important to mention also. I don't think we should bring fear into the conversations and talk about good karma, bad karma, but I do believe that people that get really obsessed with other people, that is an expression of your ego. That is an expression of the fear, of the insecurities, and you will not be able to ascend and progress with your own journey if you're super obsessed with somebody else. And unfortunately, I've had a couple of cycles in my life where I've had people super obsessed with keeping me at a certain level, and that doesn't end well. So it doesn't matter if you've been oppressed by somebody else or you have made it your mission to keep somebody stuck because you didn't want to let them go. It never ends well. So the best thing that anyone can do is to keep that focus on themselves, to do a daily reflection. Where am I at? What are my values? How can I be of service? Who can I help today? How can I express my most authentic self today? And who can I ask for help if I'm struggling? A powerful reminder. I think the chief consciousness officer will be that person, even more so than the HR. Sorry to any HRs listening here. Your job is still going to be important, but I think the chief consciousness officer being in that neutral position, this is exactly what we need for these honest conversations that we might not feel confident bringing up to HR.
Yes, and that's a very good point. I did actually a post on that. There's no threat to HR. They work very cohesively together if the HR doesn't feel threatened. But there's no threat. The CCO does not replace anyone in the organization, especially HR.
Or the other CCO, the chief communication officer.
Correct.
That's a different type of communicating.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it all works together. It just makes everyone in the C-suite it really does. Because that individual has removed the bias, the conditioning, and most of their ego in a sense that it just helps everyone a way that is so neutral. It just brings up everyone. There's no threat from either side. And when that happens, you've got such an open space for both sides to flourish.
For unity, for co-creation, for actually seeing each other, hearing each other. Thank you for co-creating this episode with me, Charley. I really appreciated your insights, your optimism for change, and I think it's already changing people's perspectives. And I'm excited to see the companies, the leaders, and the everyday people that you get to reach with your mission, because I think it's creating the precise shift that we need to see and feel in our own inner world, but also in our bodies. Because when we're surrounded by people that have elevated their frequency, we almost feel these tingles of joy, of ease, of excitement that replace heaviness, that replace the guilt and the shame and the doubt. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having this on. Thank you for getting this discussion out there.
I think we might have you for another episode pretty soon.
Fine with me. I'll be there. Tell me when.